Hello, and welcome to Secure Talk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Secure Talk. This is your host, Justin Beals. I'm really excited to have you join us today. We have some exceptional guests once again, two folks that are joining us today. They are the authors of a book called Job/Security. I've had a chance to read it in true physical form, which has been pretty amazing to flip the pages again. And so let me introduce our guests here briefly, and we'll dig into this work. Today with me, I have Danny Goodwin, who is a professor and chair of the Department of Art and Art History at the University at Albany, SUNY. His photographic, video, and installation work has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions. Also with us, his co-author is Ed Schwarzschild. He is the professor and director of creative writing at the English department at the University at Albany, SUNY. And he is the author of 3 works of fiction: Insecurity, The Family Diamond, and Responsible Men. He has also written for The Guardian, The Believer, and Virginia Quarterly Review. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today on Secure Talk. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin.
Oh, it's great to be here, Justin. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we'll kind of have you guys answer. Whoever wants to go first for some of these questions can, but feel free. As we stated, this is a great discussion.
We like to do a harmony, if that's cool.
I would only de-harmonize us, though. But there's art in that, right, Danny? Let me just say we have 3 folks in liberal arts backgrounds here. My degree is actually in theater.
Great.
But pretty early on, I started programming. It paid at the time really well.
A little better than theater? Weird.
Yeah, I know. Strange. But I loved that you guys bring this particular work about security. One of the things that stood out to me is, and has stood out to me in the security space, is how broad it is and how many different types of aspects there are to it. But let's look back a little bit. You both come from a background in academia, storied careers in your respective fields. Have either of you ever held a job in security yourselves?
Danny, you did it first.
Well, we kind of both have. Briefly, very briefly. I mean, I had maybe a more serious security job, but when I was in graduate school at Hunter College in New York City, my initial job when I hit town, moving from Dallas, Texas to New York City, was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a security guard.
Oh, wow.
Because free shoes.
That's true. They gave you shoes.
Yeah, they give you shoes. Yeah. And they're nice. They're like steel toe, like serious, like art shoes. And I didn't last very long because I didn't realize, I should have realized that the hours were sort of all in a row. And and it's lots of standing, and there were rules back then about contrapposto, you can't like lean, and you can't read, and you can't sketch. And I think that a lot of that has lifted now. I understand from talking to people who do the job now. But yeah, I lasted, I don't know, a few months. But Ed, tell your gig.
I mean, first I want to say I was really grateful, Justin, that you shared your background, because when I was preparing for today and I was looking at Secure Talk online and listening to some of the podcasts, I felt I'm still intimidated in a substantial way, and I feel very much like an outsider. But I'm glad to know that we share this sort of valuing of the humanities and the liberal arts. So I was really happy to hear that. In terms of my own experience, I was working on a novel for a long time, the novel called Insecurity. And in that book, the main character works for the TSA. And I was having difficulty writing the book because I just couldn't get access to the world of a TSA worker. I wanted to know what it was like to work the job. And I would try to talk to people when I was getting, patted down. When I would fly, I would always select the pat down to maybe have a chance to talk to an actual TSA worker. But those weren't good opportunities to get a real close kind of conversation going. So eventually I applied for a job as a TSA worker at Albany International Airport near where we teach. And took a long time, but I got through the screenings, I got the job, and I worked for a few months in that position, which informed the novel in a major way, but also kind of motivated what Danny and I have been doing, which was to get to know better the people doing these jobs, not just in the TSA. I became interested in all the aspects of security labor, to think about who are these workers and why are they taking the jobs? What does it mean to them? What does it mean to their families?
First off, I have to commend you on working for the TSA. Every time I go through an airport checkout line, there's a certain amount of, man, that would be hard for me to do, staring at the screen the same time or dealing with weird personalities.
Especially when there's writers coming through wanting to talk to you about your life. And
I'm sure you
worst.
Had some moments, Ed, where you learned some things about the job and what it takes to be successful at it.
Absolutely. I mean, I learned things I could have never learned any other way, it turned out, right? And I was working the 5 to 9 a.m. shift before I would go into my real job. And the main thing I learned, I would say, is that these workers who are so easily villainized in the media, it's people mock the TSA all the time. And I'm sure there's good reason occasionally. But all I can speak about was my own experience at this one airport, Albany International Airport. And the workers I met there were people who were trying to raise a family. They were people who were looking for a career that could continue to advance in a way that was secure, where they could get benefits and build something. So I found that really powerful. I found that kind of as a way to humanize the industry. I'm not saying it's perfect. I can't speak for what it's like to work at O'Hare or JFK or something like that. But at the airport where I learned a lot about just the human nature of what it meant to hold the job.
Danny and Ed, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project. What you guys had personal interest in this area, but what kind of brought you together to share in going after it?
Sure. Ed, why don't you do that? We did a radio interview yesterday, and the host asked me that question, and I started answering and realized I would prefer if Ed started. So
I love telling the origin story of the project. We met when I started at the university here in 2001, and I had done work as a graduate student for my PhD, researching in American literature about the relationships between writers and photographers. I was really interested in that for a long time. So as soon as I got here on the job as a new hire, I went to the art department to find a photographer. And I quickly found Danny, and we hit it off, and we started talking about various things. And over time, we learned that we shared this kind of thing from childhood, where we both had fathers who had worked in one way or another for the security industry. My father was he was in the Air Force Reserves for a while, and he always told stories about what he had done. And I always wanted more information about what he had done, as any child would, right? If someone's talking about parachuting into Lebanon or teaching hand-to-hand combat, you want more information. But he would always say, "I'm sorry, it's classified. I can't tell you anything about it." And then he would occasionally drop other, incredible pieces of stories, but he would refuse to fill them out. So part of the legacy for me, I think, is as a fiction writer, I think it grows out of that sort of desire to get the whole story. And that's maybe a positive benefit, but I think it had negative benefits too, in terms of creating distance and that sense of the unknown in a childhood. And I mean, Danny can talk about his father, then I can continue the story further.
Yeah, so my dad was an engineer, which is what we knew about him growing up. And he worked for Texas Instruments in Dallas, which we thought, he makes calculators, like the calculators. And it turns out he worked on many of the most secretive projects, black programs in the military industrial complex at the time, like, the earliest night vision systems in Vietnam, to the tracking systems for the stealth fighter, which was a super black program. I mean, that was not even supposed to exist at all. Congress didn't give them the money for that. So then they went black, and then it was just a bonanza of cash.
Yeah.
To missile defense, another moment when Congress said no, and, SDI turned out to be a thing that happened anyway. And then he was a contractor. He retired at 54. So I'm going to be 60 next year. And I can't imagine retiring for another decade. My dad retired at 54 and then became a consultant. So he was sitting then on the other side of the table. So as an engineer, a program manager, for all these black programs, the client was always, classified, right? But usually CIA, NSA, and the various, military, programs. And so when he was a consultant, after he was done doing that, he was on the other side of the table working for the military and the intelligence community, critiquing the proposals of contractors. And he did that for a few years. And I don't know if I've ever even told Ed this story. Maybe I have, but he likes to tell the story of when he got a sense that things may be going sideways and he exited wrote a letter of resignation. I won't be a part of the problem. I will only be a part of the solution kind of thing. And it was shortly after that all the people he worked to went to federal prison. Yeah. For all kinds of misappropriation of funds. And yeah, so there was a blacker part of that black program. It turns out that was largely a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
I've had family members that worked, for the military as well. And it's that lack of information, that barrier between you and them that I think created some of your inspiration to fill in these stories.
For sure.
By meeting more people that are doing that.
We interviewed our fathers for this project, which was fascinating. Yeah. And it didn't make it into the book because they weren't useless, but they weren't helpul. Helpful to us, not helpful in the sense of
helpful for the book,
trajectory of the book.
They're both in closure, maybe, maybe not. Yeah,
I still don't know the answers.
My dad talked about things he's never talked about. It was great. I mean, the standard interview is like an hour and a half. It went like, I don't know how you did the transcription, Ed. It was like 2.5, 3 hours.
At least, yeah.
And he revealed to me that he learned after he retired that the CIA was the client for his first black program. He had no idea his entire career. And there were moments when he worked on the stealth fighter where his supervisor had a lower security clearance than he did. So he couldn't actually tell his boss what he was working on. He just had to clock in and do the work. And anyway.
Yeah. I had that kind of experience at my first computing job. I worked for British Telecom and we were rolling out a global data network. And I was given a key card to the data center and I could get into the data center and rack gear or work on gear. And I realized my boss didn't have a key card. He would have to ask me to go in and do some work. And I always found that absolutely intriguing. Here I am, a 25-year-old kid getting access to things that likely my boss and my boss's boss and their boss didn't have access to at all.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
But learning to live with those blind spots. I mean, that was a big part of the connection that Ed and I had. It's like,
yes,
you normalize these blind spots. It's like, I don't know most of the stuff.
Right. And we were even then at that point, I think Danny was a father. I was soon to become a father. And, it makes you think about what kind of father you want to be. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your children and your spouse? But another thing that happened that was really crucial to the origin of the book and the exhibition that we have up now is while we were teaching here at the university in 2015, the very first College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity opened up on our campus. It was Andrew Cuomo was the governor. It was a big deal to announce that this first freestanding college devoted to Homeland Security, they would have majors, have professors, it suddenly had an amazing new building. And we
Tons
thought,
of full-time lines.
Yes. If we want to push forward with this project, now is the time. We can talk to people, we can get access, which we really couldn't get prior to that. And we were asking questions too. What does it mean that our university now has this college? What are the implications of that for the rest of us, for the students, and for the future? So I think our fathers and then the appearance of this college made this project inevitable for us.
And we still have those questions, like, what does it mean about us that, like, this is a growth industry? This is
Yes.
where the jobs will be. And that's part of the play on words of the title of the book, is job security, job/security. What does that say about us, and how, to be cynical still, how complicit are we in the world seeming dangerous?
Certainly the title, it is dangerous. The title stood out to me, knowing that you both have an artistic bent. I kept looking at job/security and thinking about the stories, and the slash mark is a really common thing in computer science. We use it all the time for
it means
a lot
a directory
of different
change.
Yeah. So it can do concept shifts or dictate areas of influence, like in a network, things like that. I was curious about the title. Are there archetypes that you're bringing forward with the job/security?
What do you mean by archetypes?
Like, are there meanings that are imbued by not just saying job security, but introducing the slash into the title?
Honestly, that was our brilliant editor at MIT who suggested the slash. I mean, I can't remember, Ed, how we had the job security : and then the subtitle, but I don't think we had a slash initially. I think that was Katie Helke, our editor.
I think we had a colon, and then we couldn't do a double
that's what
colon.
It was double colon.
Job
double
colon security. Yeah. So
job
she
colon
swapped
security colon, and she was like, "No, we don't do double colon." Yeah.
Right.
Also, the initial title of the book was so ridiculous. I still love it, but it was kind of inspired by Studs Terkel's Working, the subtitle of which is "People Talk About What They Do Every Day, All Day, and How They Feel About What They Do." And so our proposed title, way back when MIT first said okay, was Job Security: Security Personnel Talk About the Parts of Their Jobs They Can Talk About and How They Feel About the Parts of Their Jobs They Can't Talk About.
Oh, wow.
And they were just like, absolutely not.
Yeah, that's a big one. But it definitely brings forth something that I think was common, is that in a lot of the interviews, and well, maybe we should start there for a second. Help describe for us, the audience, the format of the book, the structure.
The format of the book is, it's mainly, I mean, there's a sort of a critical apparatus that comes in a sort of a forward and afterward, talking about sort of putting what we did in a context. But the main part of the book is interviews and photographs. And the photographs are, Danny can talk about how the photographs are divided up. I can talk about the interviews for a moment. The interviews were mostly done in person, face-to-face, which I think is important. Sometimes during the pandemic, we did some interviews, and those were by Zoom. But even when we interviewed someone on Zoom, we eventually met them in person. And we had some standard questions that we would start with and build out from, not about trying to seek classified information from anyone, but just trying to talk about exactly what Danny was just saying. What does it feel like to do this job? What does it feel like to be a spouse? What does it feel like to be a parent while you're doing this job? What does it do to your family? What are some of the challenges of the work? Things like that. And those interviews would run an hour to 2 hours. Then we would get a transcript of the interview, and that would be a pretty long document, usually, including what we said, including what the interviewee said. And it would be, 20,000 words, 25,000 words. And the editing process was to cut it down to around 5,000 words, like basically a 20-page interview. And we would remove, the first step was to remove everything we as interviewers had said, right? And just have the words spoken to us by the person we were talking to. And then my task was to shape it into a narrative that would be like, I'm a fiction writer. I didn't put anything in, right? I didn't tell a story that wasn't being told to me. I didn't change any words or insert any of my own words, but I cut words and I move things around, so that my hope is that each interview almost reads like a story in terms of having a beginning, a middle, and an end, and some shape to it. And in the book, there's 18 of those interviews that range from Border Patrol officers to CIA workers to people who have been targeted by surveillance programs to people who are outspoken critics of the security industry, people who worked as Secret Service agents, people who work for emergency management. When we say a composite portrait, we really tried to get a broad look at this field from people from all perspectives, all levels of employment, whether they were a chief of the Border Patrol or someone who had only been in the Border Patrol for a couple of years, a consultant, senior, junior, female, male, just as diverse a group as possible within one book. It's a beginning, of course, but that's what we were striving for.
Yeah. And in terms of the images, for the portraits anyway, not only did I need a kind of consistent aesthetic, conceit, I wanted them all to be consistent in terms of composition and I made a decision early on, okay, the people will all be black and white. But also, there's a hierarchy involved in what Ed was just describing in the diversity of these positions, because some people are students seeking to go into the field. Some people are retired policymakers in the field, and all of them are experts of their own opinions, right? They're all experts of their own experience. And so they can speak, with authority about what it's like to do what they're doing. So I wanted to have a kind of leveling mechanism aesthetically. So everyone's depicted essentially, as you see in the book, they're all presented, kind of the same. A very shallow depth of field. It's a large format camera. So the face is in sharp focus. Everything from the ears back is blurred. So it really doesn't make much difference where the interview took place, except that it made a lot of difference to the person. They got to choose where they were interviewed, and they got to choose where their portrait was made. A lot of them were very confused that didn't enter into the ultimate picture. You couldn't see, we couldn't see Ed's father's workshop behind him. It was all blurred out, but he was in his space. And so slightly this much more comfortable with me having him sit still for a really long time while I take their portrait.
It seems like the work is very biographical in nature, essentially, in both that you, Danny, are trying to capture them in a space where they feel comfortable, but them, not the space.
Right.
And you, Ed, are trying to capture the story, crafting the story, but it's their story fundamentally. You don't want to shift it. You want to present it with clarity, right?
Absolutely.
For sure. And that's one of the things I said in my little bit that I wrote in the book, is that the sort of contrivance of using the camera in the way that I did kind of simulates what happens in your vision when you're actually listening to someone. When you're paying attention, you're looking them in the eye, everything else kind of disappears. It's there, you can see it, but you don't see it. And that's very much like what it was like to talk to these people. Everything else kind of fell away. We were in an interview where the fire alarm went off, and we sat there for several minutes too long. Waiting to like figure out, I guess we do have to leave, right? You get kind of caught up, and people would tell us things that our handlers at the time would tell us they'd never told anyone else. I mean, they just start talking, and it was remarkable. So the photographs kind of in some oblique way honor that.
Mm-hmm. I certainly find it so intriguing and heartwarming in a way that you had these experiences with family members where there were gaps in what you were allowed to share with them. And yet you're taking this opportunity to ameliorate some of those gaps by removing the clutter to be engaged with that human being in that moment in time.
Exactly.
Very special.
Danny mentioned Studs Terkel as an influence, a great oral historian. And that's part of what we wanted to do was create an oral history. And we're also, inspired by a lot of classic documentary practice, whether it's James Agee and Walker Evans, or someone like Barbara Ehrenreich, or just people who have devoted a huge amount of their lives to going out and finding the stories of people whose stories don't get told enough, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a couple of these stories if y'all are open to it.
Sure.
Some of the ones that I read that I loved. So I hope you'll forgive my editorialization. But one of the ones that really stood out to me was Terry Merce. Can you tell us a little bit about Terry and Terry's story?
Terry is contingent faculty with the University of Albany with the CEHC, College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity. And she was one of the several people that our various inquiries with faculty and the dean in particular said, oh, yeah, you got to talk to Terry. And Ed and I gave a little brown bag lecture to faculty at CEHC about what we were doing. And this was, I don't know, it was a few years ago. It was before we had a book, before we had a contract with MIT. We were like, maybe this is a book, this thing we're doing. I don't know. And Terry responded to that really positively and wanted to know more about the project. And I was like, okay, so you want to know more about us? We want to know more about you. And I mean, is that a fair characterization, Ed, of how that came to pass and we came to talk more with Terry?
Absolutely. And there were, as the book developed, there were, we were learning along the way. Like I said at the beginning, we're outsiders, right? So we didn't even know the sort of the boundaries of the field that we were beginning to explore. And as we went forward, we would say, hey, we haven't talked to a person who does this, or we haven't talked to a person who does that. And so we were really excited to talk to cybersecurity, and especially someone who was a female and who had been in the field for a long time. I mean, I think Terry's origin story to me is fascinating.
Sure.
And it was just such a blast to hear her talk about her movement from growing up in Europe to being lured back to the States for an education, her early work with computers and her facility that was discovered by others and sort of recognized. And then she got pushed in this direction and just kept excelling in this world that was not dominated by female cybersecurity personnel. Yeah. And I found her story incredibly inspiring, and the way that she managed to share it was such. I wish you could have been in the room, Justin. I mean, she was like bubbly. I mean, she was joyful. She was such a. I mean, we talked to a lot of people whose interviews were really heavy. Yeah, who.
And there are long kind of stretches of silence.
And you walked out afterwards feeling like you were carrying something not easy to carry, and it made you appreciate even more the person you had just spoken with. I think Terry carries a lot too, but her manner and her storytelling were just a pleasure to witness.
I'm always surprised by people that I meet in technology as an industry broadly, including cybersecurity, about how personable some of them are.
Yeah.
Like myself, how many of us, even though we certainly work with machines, most of the day crave authentic human interaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wrote a note down about Terry after reading her story. I wrote the accidental spy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Would you guys like to relate a little bit that part of Terry's story?
I mean, I could tell one, and then maybe Danny can tell one.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the details that I recall that it still makes me almost like smile. I mean, there was a certain guilelessness or innocence to her as a, maybe she still has it, but certainly as a young woman. And she describes being, while she was working in a bar in Europe maybe as a teenager, and she met some people, I think from Czechoslovakia maybe, who then encouraged her to go take pictures. I think this is, it was post World War II. Go take pictures of this installation that they hadn't been able to get images of, and just as a favor. And then at the last second they said, "And would you mind using?" I think they said, "Would you mind using like an infrared camera or some kind of special camera to get the images?" And she was like, she didn't question it at all. She's just like, "Yeah, these are nice people. I'll go take these pictures." And then complications ensued. But when you say accidental, that's what I think of, Justin. Like it wasn't like she was born and decided, I want to be a cybersecurity specialist. Like one thing led to another, in part because she was just open-hearted and generous.
She also discovered that she was super smart and super good at the job, better than anyone else around her. That has a big part of her ascendance to the levels she rose to. I mean, I have to be careful because I can't remember if this is in the book or not, because there were a lot of stories that all of these people told that didn't ultimately make it in the book for various reasons. But Terry's not the only woman who had the experience in the intelligence community of sitting in a briefing and having the person across the desk address her assistant. And the assistant would have to say, no, that's her. You want to be talking to her. And then Terry actually would vary the spelling of her name, right, Ed? Her name is spelled Terri, but in certain environments, would replace the I with a Y. And that was so that the person would assume that it was a man. And then they'd meet Terry and be like, oh, it's you. Oh, and that worked for a while.
It's funny how we have these preconceived notions of who operates in certain spaces or who can be good at it, when in actuality, in my experience, the true innovators like Ada Lovelace around computing, true spy work was done a lot more by women than men as we look back to pre-World War II.
Yeah.
And they've not been given the I think the gratitude that they likely deserved. And therefore they didn't get the chance to inspire people that saw themselves in that individual to go and pursue those careers as well. And it's too bad.
So the underlying premise of that novel, The Perfect Spy, right?
Okay. Next interview I really liked. This one is maybe a little bit darker. Was Francisco Cantu. Could one of you like to describe a little bit about Francisco's background, why you were interested in interviewing him?
I mean, Francisco, I was interested in talking to him because of the sort of gorgeous, heartbreaking memoir he wrote called The Line Becomes a River, reflecting on his experience as a Border Patrol agent. He worked for several years and then left, and then wrote this incredible memoir about his experience and what it was like after he left the Border Patrol. So he seemed like a really important voice to speak with, because he both had insider knowledge and he had decided, and he was reflecting on what it had meant to do the work. And he was, all the interviews were so powerful. And his was extraordinarily powerful. And I guess that's why we spoke with him, and we got to go see him in Tucson and just actually visit the border that we had been writing about and hearing about. And I feel like his voice was a really central part of just that Border Patrol part of the book. I think we talked to 4 people in the Border Patrol, and it seemed vital to have a voice of someone who was looking back in and a bit more critical than other people who had made great lives working in the Border Patrol.
Yeah. And we also talked to a couple of folks at University of El Paso, UT El Paso, where they have, not the first, because we're the first, but another college of Homeland Security, which newsflash is more focused on the border, being in El Paso. But we also talked to Carla Provost, who was the chief of the Border Patrol under Trump administration. And one of the sort of, not really serendipitous, because we set up these conditions, but in a couple of cases in the book, folks are talking about similar or even the exact same subject from essentially diametrically opposed positions. Both correct, because, as I say, they're experts of their experience. And in a real sense, they're both experts. I mean, Carla Provost was the architect of a lot of the policy that Francisco Cantu had to implement, and they disagree. They disagree fundamentally about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And they'll never talk to each other. Likely never talk to each other. But in the book, they're in conversation, because they're both talking about the weaponization of the desert and whether or not kids were really in cages and things like that,
Yeah.
And whether or not even the job is dangerous. There's a moment, so I don't want to get too tangential, but we also have an exhibition that we can talk about later that's open now at the museum at our university. And one of the things that we've set up are these video sort of virtual conversations where we've got these 72-inch monitors vertically mounted, facing each other about 12 feet apart. And if you stand between the two, you got to look one way or the other, but you can't make sense if you're in the center. because the audio overlaps. But it will track as you move one way or the other. And then you can hear clearly what one person is saying if you move to the left or the right. And there are moments where on this side, Cantu says, this is not an inherently dangerous job. The desert is not an inherently dangerous place. We made it that way. And Carla Provost says, this is an incredibly dangerous job. These are incredibly dangerous people in dangerous conditions. It's like, they're talking about the exact same thing, and they have completely different takes, and they're both expert.
Yeah. I wrote down 3 notes in regards to Francisco's interview. Border Patrol as a political battleground, Border Patrol as a geographic battleground, and the Border Patrol as a personal battleground. It just seemed like a lot of hurt all around.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Francisco actually says that in his interview. He says something about how the border is a place. It's my home. It's also an idea. It's also, a political thing. Something, he says it probably more elegantly than that.
Mm-hmm. And the sort of complex nature of that, is that all the people we talk to, when you're talking to them, looking in the eye, you can feel that their intentions are good, right?
Yeah.
Francisco grew up. He grew up living there. He had really powerful memories of being on the border with his mother and what a childhood meant there. And when he went to grad school and college, he wanted to find a way to help the border be a better place, and that's why he joined the Border Patrol, because he thought he could work from inside to improve it. Other people we talked to, Victor, told incredible stories about growing up with a father who had immigrated into the United States, who took him around and took him to work at a slaughterhouse and said, look, this is the kind of job you get without an education. I want better for you. And the Border Patrol became a great place for Victor to build a career and try to do good. And similar with Carla and with Adrian, the other Border Patrol person we talked to, they all have this space in their heart where they're trying to improve the situation, even from their diametrically opposed positions.
Yeah, it is certainly a very tough context in which to operate. They're human beings. There's on both sides security perceptions that are constantly being challenged. Danny, I'm glad you brought up the exhibition, because there is a lot going on to this project beyond just the book. And maybe I'd love for you to, continue to describe the exhibition itself. Is it at the university presently?
Yeah, I like to say it's starting there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you're going to do the origami demonstration. Yeah,
great.
That worked really well yesterday on the radio.
While you speak.
So the exhibition is obviously informed by the book, the project that became the book, but it's a very, very different thing, because an exhibition can do different things, and a book can do things an exhibition can't do. But in a nutshell, what I'm able to accomplish in a physical space is a different kind of engagement with a viewer. So in the book, you page through and you see, the training facility in Oriskany, New York, for example, the city drugs and the Rosterfield Motel. And this is going to mean nothing to anyone who hasn't bought the book. So everyone should buy the book. But, they all exist 8 by 10. And that thing that happens when, I shoot mostly with a 4 by 5 inch view camera. So it's very, very large image, 2.5 gigabyte file. And in the case of some of the photographs, they're 7 feet tall. And so, standing 30 or 40 feet away from it, it's one thing, and it's real. You experience a real thing because it's photography. So this is a drugstore, and then you approach it, and there's a thing where the descriptive level of the camera and the information that's in the actual world flip. And what I mean by that is, as you approach it, you see more and more detail in terms of resolution. But what is revealed is a conspicuous lack of detail in the real world. So you realize, oh, this is not really a drugstore. Then what the hell is it? And why is it here? Why am I here? And the same with a lot of those other images. A similar thing happens with another set of large color photographs that I did for the book, but also larger for the exhibition, in that they're not real spaces. They're not real photographs at all. I mean, they're real photographs of models. So in a lot of cases, I will construct a tabletop model made of paper. The paper is made of printouts from Google Earth ground view. And the conceit there is that, early before Google Earth was Google Earth, it was Keyhole, which was a startup that was funded by InQtel, the CIA's venture capital arm. And now everyone uses it. And in a way, there's a metaphor there in terms of inside outside of this enterprise. Ed said we're outsiders. We don't have security clearances. We don't have expertise. We talk to people who hold these positions and work this job. But we're also experts because it affects all of us. We all use Google Earth all the time. We all fly on airplanes. We all, we get to the border, we deal with it. So there's a part of it that's like, yeah, it's like acupuncture. Like everything's connected, so maybe over here, this person works in security. Over here, this person feels the effects in their big toe of, a needle that was stuck in their earlobe. That's probably one of those things you're going to have to edit out.
but Dan, maybe it would be helpful, Dan. We talked about the portraits in the book, but we haven't talked about the other three sections of the book that are just your images and how you constructed those three portions, and how that, I think that corresponds more to what you're saying about the exhibition.
Yes. Yeah, the interstitials are amazing, Danny, because you have both the models, the picture that you were trying to present that was built out of the model, and then you pull back and show us the space in which you constructed them. That was amazing.
That was one of those things that the editors insisted on, because that's not something I typically do. I don't typically pull back and reveal the. I feel like that shows how much I'm cheating. The editors at MIT were really insistent that that's something important for context and be generous to the viewer. So I said okay, and I love them now. Now that I see them, it's like that's my. I stand in the studio often and giggle at how the subject matter is not funny necessarily, but aesthetically, they can be really silly. And so, the sections, the portfolios rather, that are in the book and the portfolios that are displayed in the museum. Portraits are interspersed throughout the book. And one of our earliest decisions was not to just put the person's picture and their job title right up front, which I think is a more standard convention. The interview starts, and as you page through, you see the portrait. And only at the very end of the interview do you see who they are and what they do. That was important to us as a sort of leveling mechanism. And then the simulations, that was the one trip after many years of trying to get access to the State Preparedness Training Center, a Homeland Security Training Center, that is all about a real world simulation. A lot of this stuff happens in VR, AR, and digitally. And there are some things that only really work for training to do in meat space. And so this is a multi-million dollar facility, New York State facility, where law enforcement and first responders and lots of folks go and train. Ed and I finally got access, and our request was to have no people present so that I could photograph the uncanny spaces, which I was obsessed with. And we show up on the day of something called the Excelsior Challenge, where law enforcement, literally from all over the state, hundreds of well-fed, muscular law enforcement were walking around, and they show up and they have to respond to these scripted simulations and compete and be critiqued, right? One of them was, it's a trailer park where there's a peaceful demonstration happening because a teenager was shot by police a week earlier, and now there's a demonstration, but at the demonstration, a bomb threat's been called in. So police have to show up, find the bomb or not, and also deal with everyone's there to protest the police. So someone has to has to write this scenario, and then, the law enforcement show up and react to it. Anyway, then there's the portfolio, the constructions, and those are mostly the tabletop models, Google Earth printouts of spaces that either we couldn't photograph, where we actually interviewed someone and we went physically there, but we weren't able for whatever reason, either security reasons, or it was just not technically feasible to make photographs. And I just reconstructed them, located the place on Google Earth and built a model.
It's a creative way to put your audience in the space that you never had access to through a technology like Google Earth.
It's really good at visualizing the invisible, right? I mean, that's sort of the project is showing what's not there. And so there are a few spaces, and I think you alluded to that in your earlier questions, where you can't see them on Google Earth. They're grayed out, like the Ritz-Carlton in Pentagon City, the Blackwall Hitch, where we had beer and conversations with a few people. Yeah, I couldn't get a good picture of it. I could get it in street view photographs, but I couldn't get a model, a 3D model, which is what I preferred because they're weirder. And I just, kind of clumsily presumed that maybe it hasn't been mapped for some reason, some national security reason. I don't know, because a lot of spooks hang out there. So then, that signaling visually, through the grammar of Photoshop and invisibility, I needed to show that, that's not really there.
So you use I have lived with this checkerboard layer since, I built my first website in 97 and was playing around with Photoshop. And so when I saw these spaces with shadows covered in a transparency layer, my heart jumped a beat because the metaphor was
I'm so happy to hear that, because so many people don't get it.
For our listeners, you must buy the book to see it. But this idea that the absence of data is a signal unto itself, we say sometimes in security, right? Like when we have big areas where we would expect information, like on Google Earth, and it is not there, it is telling us something deeply about that particular space, right? And Danny, I thought the way you visualized it, bringing in the metaphor of the transparency layer, but also creating a model that was shape and shadow to the thing, made it both real and unreal at the same time. It was
Thank
really,
you. That's really
yeah.
kind words. I really appreciate that, and I'm so glad that someone gets it. It's probably more messed up than you realize, because I operate with rules in the studio. I need constraints that I can then within which go crazy. But total freedom is paralyzing for me. I need constraints. I need guardrails. So one of the rules was everything has to be made out of paper. No other materials than glue and maybe pencil. And so I couldn't print out the checkerboard pattern from Photoshop. I had to draw it. So those are all hand-drawn little checkerboard patterns onto the surface of the model. Meditative.
Yeah. There's been some quality time with it. Yeah. Well, I read in the book that the project, the exhibition, the book itself is really just the beginning of this exploration. And so love to hear about what your future plans are for this project job / security. Yeah.
We have near-term and long-term plans, Ed.
Yeah.
Right.
Two things I can mention. One is, obviously this book is devoted to I think the title is the expanding American security industry. And one thing we've already started to think about is, we are not the only nation that is dealing with these issues and seeing the expansion of a security industry. So we've been working to get international participation in this project. And I spent the last semester in Amsterdam, actually, at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study, working with a group of anthropologists and sociologists who have done a lot of work on security labor in India, in South Africa, in Israel, Palestine, and other regions of the world, to sort of make the composite portrait we're creating much larger, and to try to think about, okay, what can we learn from how other countries are approaching the problem? And we're going to have a workshop here at Albany that's going to be an international workshop on reimagining security labor. And I think that part of our project is going to continue to grow. the other thing we've always hoped, in addition to a book and an exhibition, was to also create some kind of web presence so that this archive of testimonies, of oral histories can continue to grow. Because, I mean, 18 is a great start for interviews, and that's 18 from probably more than 30 that we've already done. But I mean, I believe there need to be hundreds. Everybody should be, not everybody, but more interviews should be gathered, and there should be a space for them. And some kind of online archive of interviews seems to me and Danny to be an interesting direction and an important direction to move in the future.
Yeah, we've also kind of fantasized about pulling us out of the equation in terms of managing the interviews, and having a more turnkey, user-friendly way for people to just submit. We haven't figured that out, but do you have any ideas for that? Great.
Okay, right, because there's just two of us.
Yeah,
we can only travel so far and talk to so many people, but if we can deputize is the wrong word, if we can involve and collaborate with more people, like students at the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, if it can be part of their curriculum, then this kind of archive can build in a really organic way.
Yeah, and a baby step toward that is, starting Monday, we're teaching a graduate course, team teaching, Ed and I, along with the Dean of the College of Homeland Security, Robert Griffin. And we've got teams of 3 graduate students collaborating on projects throughout the semester, and the 3 representatives are an art graduate student, English, and Homeland Security. So they're forced to work together on these problems and projects. It may or may not work, but we're doing it.
It's gonna work.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. we always are glass half full. Things are happening. I was telling a friend the other day, the things we work at come true. It happens. Yeah. I'm deeply grateful for the representation that you guys have provided for workers in the security space broadly. It is a society, and I don't think we've all the time understood the threads we pull with each other when we do the work together, and our passions and what brought us here. Everything from providing for a family to a patriotic or a political type passion. And it's all a part of the human experience in a way. And that's been really fun. I want to deeply recommend to our listeners who work in security industry, as broadly or finitely as you want to define it, the book, the exhibition, if you're in the area to go see it. It's amazing to have a critical, artistic and story told in the space, and it's really emerging. And so I highly recommend the book as it gets released. Do we have a release date for it, Danny and Ed?
The book is out. The book is out.
It came out August 13th.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
It's available. Yeah. It's available where you buy books.
Good. There'll be a link to it in the show links. Yeah. At the end. And I'm very grateful to have this time to spend with you guys. Thank you for joining us today on Secure Talk, Ed and Danny.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. It really means the world to us that you invited us to be a part of this. It's been a fantastic experience. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Hope you both have a great day. Thanks, everybody, for joining.